Welcome to Middle East Macromedia. My name is Agnieszka Pikulicka, and today we'll be discussing US-Taliban negotiations, hostage diplomacy, the renewed debate about Bagram Air Base, and the future of Afghan immigration and refugee policy. The relationship between Washington and the Taliban remains one of the most difficult and unresolved questions in regional diplomacy. With negotiations, the fate of Afghan refugees and renewed discussion of strategic sites such as Bagram Air Base, all back on the agenda, Afghanistan is once again part of the wider conversation about US security, leverage, and engagement in the region. To help us understand these developments, we are joined by Ambassador Omar Samad, a former Afghan diplomat, policy advisor, and analyst with decades of experience in Afghanistan foreign policy and regional affairs. Ambassador Samad served as Afghanistan ambassador to Canada and to France. Earlier, he served as spokesperson for Afghanistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and as Director General for Information and Media during the post-2001 transition period. Ambassador Samad, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to this discussion.
So maybe let's start from the most basic question. So, do we know how many hostages are held by the Taliban at the moment, and what kind of people these are?
Thank you. The issue of the detainees, meaning foreign hostages or foreign detainees in the hands of the Taliban in Afghanistan, is not very clear. It's a bit murky because in some accounts, they say that at least there are 2 or 3 American citizens who are still being held in Afghanistan. Whether there are other foreign citizens being held, we don't know for a fact. For example, late last year, an elderly British couple who had been in Afghanistan for many years were released and went back to the UK. Last year, we also saw the release of 4 American hostages or detainees, one of whom was Afghan American. So we think that there are 2 or 3 at least. I think that this is one issue that has to be clarified as the 2 sides continue their sort of back channel discussions on the detainees.
So, what is the main purpose of the Taliban still keeping the detainees? Is it to have some sort of communication channel with Washington open, or is it, a way to get some concessions from the West?
Let me also add that the Taliban are claiming that there are at least still 1 Afghan citizen being held by the United States in Guantanamo. Someone that some people say was an innocent person. Others claim that he had some ties 25 years ago to some terrorist organization. It is not very clear, again, as to what the status of that person is. So it's sort of a 2-way street right now. As far as what the purpose may be, some people call it detainee diplomacy. Obviously, having some type of engagement on this issue provides an avenue for discussion. How is it being used? Is it leverage? Is it some type of an opening? Is it a precondition for more discussions on other issues? Or is it, at the end of the day, something that will become a problem and an obstacle for engagement? Again, not very clear. The White House, which is basically running this operation, is very busy with other issues, as you know. So the Afghanistan issue right now is not central to American policy, but it is being followed up at some level. For the Taliban, it's important because they have all types of demands. They have all kinds of expectations. The Americans and the Western allies have also many expectations. We can discuss that. They range from issues that have to do with counterterrorism to issues that have to do with human rights and gender rights, and even issues that have to do with sanctions and the freezing of Afghanistan's assets by the United States and other countries. So there's a lot on the agenda, but the agenda is frozen because at this stage, the United States considers the detainee issue as being critical and a priority issue that needs to be addressed.
So, can we look at the Taliban diplomacy in the region a little bit more broader and see how this, hostage, let's say, negotiations play out in the larger landscape of Taliban relations with other regional players?
I think that the detainee issue at the regional level is indirect. It is mostly a direct issue between the United States and the Taliban. Remember that in 2020, an agreement was signed between the Taliban. At the time, they were not in power. They were in insurgency, and the United States government under Trump version one, his first presidency. And in that particular agreement, there's stipulation that there will be counterterrorism cooperation, that there will be no threat coming from Afghanistan, that Afghanistan will move towards a different type of Islamic state status, which never happened because the Taliban filled the void that was left by the fleeing of the previous government in August of 2021, which led to the collapse of the republic. And so there are some unsettled issues that affect the regional geopolitics. But I think that at this stage, the Russians and the Chinese, of course, the Iranians are busy with their own affairs right now, but they're still keeping an eye on Afghanistan. Pakistan mainly is very concerned about some counterterrorism issues with the Taliban. Countries like India, even Turkey and some Arab states, all of them are stakeholders who are watching what is happening. And one factor that they're watching, obviously, is how US-Taliban relations develop in one way or the other.
Let's move to another topic that I wanted to discuss with you today. Recently, President Donald Trump said that he would like the United States to take over the Bagram base again. Bagram base, so a very important place for the US military when the US military was still in Afghanistan. How viable you think this is? How realistic it is for the United States to return to Bagram Air Base?
Well, it seems like for a few people in Washington, this may be a goal or a realistic goal, or maybe, again, some type of a tactic in order to engage on some other issues. It's not very clear, again, as to what Mr. Trump is referring to in terms of how it can be operationalized and implemented in today's Afghanistan, where territorial sovereignty is held by the Taliban. And I think that part of this goes back to the 2018-2021 period when Mr. Trump, and during his first presidency, was negotiating with the Taliban, and the Bagram Air Base issue came up then. So I think he still has it as a in the back of his mind that Bagram fell into the hands of the Taliban. There could have been a different kind of deal, which happened under Mr. Biden. And Mr. Biden obviously was not interested in negotiating beyond a withdrawal of US troops. So Mr. Trump thinks that maybe he can revisit Bagram. But the Taliban are not fully ready for this discussion, first of all, because of sovereignty issues. Secondly, because they feel that it could also create regional repercussions. There will be countries in the region that will not probably look favorably on this unless there's some kind of consensus between great powers on counterterrorism, for example. and if there is shared interests, then maybe this could happen. But at this stage, I think that Bagram is an idea, but an idea that will need a lot of talking, discussion, and work. There is also this other option that Bagram can be retaken by force. There are some people who say that Pakistan may have given some type of assurance to the United States or Mr. Trump in the White House that they can help with that kind of a situation. But I think it's a very difficult situation to engage in a military operation in Afghanistan again, and to try to either capture or hold territory in Afghanistan, unless the Taliban themselves are part of any type of deal or agreement on how to go forward in a situation that will help both sides. So there are different views on this, and nothing clear and nothing that I would say is ready to implement at this stage.
I mean, the most important thing is that the US doesn't recognize the Taliban government, so it would be very difficult to implement, like practically. But I wonder, what would be the purpose of the American, of the American return to Afghanistan? What is behind this idea? What kind of thinking?
Well, Mr. Trump has mentioned one issue, and that is the proximity of Bagram Air Base to China. I'm as a former diplomat, somebody who watches geopolitical trends closely. I think that from a military perspective, security perspective, counterterrorism perspective, this proposition holds some merit, but not entirely. Bagram may be somewhat close to some parts of China, or some parts of Chinese installations that Mr. Trump thinks are need to be watched. But at the end of the day, I believe that the Americans were in Afghanistan for 20 years. Bagram was basically an Afghan-American base for 20 years, a NATO base as well. And there was very little talk back then about Bagram being a post, a military post watching China. So this, again, is a new idea. I'm not sure to what extent, from a military perspective, it's valid, but that's the reason that has been given. I'm not sure if it's sufficient. There are probably many, many other locations around the world or around China where this can be also accomplished. But it could also be something that is for political consumption or for domestic political consumption in the United States, where Mr. Trump wants to portray himself as someone who's different than Mr. Biden, and that he can make things happen. Whether it can happen or not is another issue, but it's part of the political rhetoric in the United States.
I wanted to also ask you about the current US capabilities in the region. So, to what extent they are the US is able to, let's say, to establish its present short of military, obviously, but like when it comes to intelligence gathering, for example, or like counterterrorism cooperation. What is the US position here at the moment?
So right now, there's almost no presence or serious engagement between the U.S. and the Taliban. The only strand of relations or contact that exists, again, as a result of the 2020 U.S.-Taliban agreement, is a security counterterrorism intelligence-led discussion that takes place occasionally. There are contacts that take place maybe once or twice a month, and there's not much news about that. It's mainly to make sure that the agreement stands, that both the Taliban adhere to their commitments and the Americans adhere to whatever commitments they have given to the Taliban. So it's mostly an intelligence sharing, counterterrorism, mainly aimed probably at groups that the United States considers as a threat. And so far, for the past almost 5 years, U.S. intelligence has on occasions sort of reflected a positive uh, reaction to these discussions that take place. And they seem to be somewhat satisfied with how the Taliban are dealing with the threats the United States considers as important to its security. So that process has continued for the last 5 years. It hasn't stopped. And whether that will lead to more contacts, it remains to be seen. On the diplomatic side, there's very little. And on the assistance and aid side, where humanitarian assistance was being given to Afghanistan for the past 4 or 5 years, because Afghanistan now is one of the poorest countries, and there is a very serious need for humanitarian assistance. The United States has brought the aid on the humanitarian front to almost zero. So the United States is no longer a humanitarian donor to Afghanistan.
And the last thing I wanted to discuss with you is, well, a recent idea of the President Donald Trump to send Afghan refugees and Afghan migrants from the US to Congo. We don't know how viable this solution is, but it definitely signals a policy change. So, how do you see this? Do you think it's possible that this will change? And what is the can we expect in US policy towards Afghan refugees and migrants?
Well, I think that the issue of Afghan refugees or migrants, because they're really not migrants, they're mostly Afghans who fled post the U.S. withdrawal. The Americans have already welcomed and reinstalled more than 120,000, if I'm not mistaken, Afghans who had some kind of relationship with the United States during the 20 years presence. So one context is this group of people who are categorized as people who need protection and who need to be admitted to the United States and resettled in the United States. The second group obviously has to do with all others who have applied for resettlement in in the United States, as well as part of refugee admissions and applications. I think that in one category you see U.S. policy grouping Afghanistan with other countries. So there's a group of more than a dozen countries that are blocked from entering the United States. And then there is this other policy concerning the Afghans who wanted to leave post 2021. In both cases, there are issues. Part of it, obviously, again, has to do with domestic American politics, has to do with the pledges and the promises that Mr. Trump had given to its followers before the last elections. And part of it has to do with new policies that America feels that it needs to adopt in terms of whether they need to decrease the number of foreigners coming into America or target certain countries for all different types of reasons, including security.
But how does it look like from the perspective of the Taliban? Would the Taliban government want Afghan refugees, for example, not to be admitted to the US or to be deported back, or it doesn't really matter?
I don't think that it really matters much to the Taliban as long as they know that that those who are returning to Afghanistan or have no other recourse but to come back are vetted from the Taliban perspective, so they don't become a threat to the Taliban themselves. And they have a policy of readmitting Afghans to come back. So they have an open policy of welcoming any Afghan who wants to come back to Afghanistan. But obviously, there are some issues in Afghanistan that people are worried about. At the same time, some Taliban may think that this could be an opening, or this could be an excuse for discussions between the Americans and the Taliban, as some Europeans have done. Some European countries like Germany and the UK and others have engaged the Taliban at a technical level in terms of issues that have to do with Afghans who need to be repatriated to Afghanistan for all kinds of reasons, legal reasons. So this type of engagement, obviously, for some may seem like diplomatic or an opening for expanding discussions in bilateral relations. But for the United States right now, that is not the case.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. This was a pleasure, and
Thank you
all the
very
best to
much.
you.
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.